So Steve Jobs is the new film by Danny Boyle, with a stand-up performance by Michael Fassbender, who is actually part of a fairly bravura ensemble cast, including Kate Winslet, who was on the show last week playing marketing chief Joanna Hoffman, and Seth Rogen playing Steve Wozniak. And essentially, the film is a non-biopic. I think this is all sort of fairly well recorded. It's not following the standard biopic line. What it does is it plays out over 3 acts, a 3-act structure, and each act is the launch of a particular product, whether it's the Apple Macintosh or the Next or the iMac. Crucially, however, what it does is it doesn't show you the launches as such. What it shows you is the backstage shenanigans and arguments before the launches, with a certain amount of flashback to fill in the blanks in the background. So there's a kind of irony in the whole thing, which is, whereas Steve Jobs famously made computers that you couldn't take the backs off and you couldn't modify them, Apple is end to end. Basically, the whole thing plays out in that the wiring tunnel. It's all the backstage thing, rather than the presentation, rather than the super slick performance, for which he became famous. It's all the stuff behind the scenes. And it's a movie which attempts to tell its story through those sequences. There's a line in the film in which Steve Jobs, as played by Michael Fassbender, says, 5 minutes before I go on stage, everybody decides to tell me exactly what they think of me, which I think is a kind of acknowledgement of the fact that this is a dramatic construct, that essentially the film is... It uses as its sort of base material an authorised biography, a very, very densely researched biography, but it obviously goes off into the realm of fiction and invention, specifically in taking all these personal stories that play out and placing them all backstage immediately before he has to go on and do a presentation. We'll hear a clip now, which is like one such moment in which an altercation just before curtain up between Michael Fassbender's Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak.
Why has Lisa not heard of me?
Man, how many 4th graders have heard of you?
You can't write code. You're not an engineer. You're not a designer. You can't put a hammer to a nail. I built the circuit board. The graphical interface was stolen from Xerox PARC. Jeff Raskin was the leader of the Mac team before you threw him off his own project. Everything, someone else designed the box. So how come 10 times in a day, I read Steve Jobs as a genius? What do you do?
I play the orchestra. And you're a good musician. You sit right there. You're the best in your row.
I came here to clear the air. Do you know why I came here?
Can you just answer that?
I came here because you're going to get killed. Your computer's going to fail.
Now, of course, that conversation takes place in the orchestra pit, which is why the thing about I play the orchestra. And, that's sort of the central conceit of the film. Alongside that, we have a number of other concerns which make this, as far as I'm concerned, an Aaron Sorkin film as opposed to a Danny Boyle film. Although I think that Danny Boyle's quick-wittedness and visual vivacity is absolutely evident in every scene, as is the fact that we have a kind of core ensemble cast that you can trace back to, like the three-hander of Shallow Grave. Very, very fine actors working completely at the top of their game, because he is, an actor's director. He's somebody who understands theatre. And again, 3-act structure, very, very sort of theatrical. And of course, in the way in which they made the film, what they did was with each sequence, they rehearsed for 2 weeks and then they filmed the sequence, and then they rehearsed for 2 weeks and then they filmed the sequence. At one point, this was meant to be a David Fincher project. And therefore, you see a number of parallels between this and The Social Network. Both of them concentrate on a central figure who is a kind of a whiz kid, but is also very brittle, frankly unlikable, and somebody who has a partner, a business partner, who during the course of the drama, as success comes calling, they proceed to snub. In this case, to some extent, Steve Wozniak, who keeps asking for credit for the Apple II team, which keeps not being given. In the case of Social Network, it's the Andrew Garfield, Eduardo Saverin, who becomes sidelined as Facebook becomes a bigger and bigger thing. But central to it all, and you also have actually the underlying thing, which is that the irony of these are stories about men who are involved with devices which will improve communication, but who themselves are weirdly and spectacularly unable to manage interpersonal communication, specifically with the women in their lives. Again, as far as Social Network is concerned, you have the whole thing about, Erica Albright, about the girlfriend who at the beginning he sort of snubs, he does this thing online, and then she says to him, the internet is not written, the internet is written in ink, it's there forever. In the case of this, the central relationship appears to be between Steve Jobs and his daughter, from whom he has denied paternity. At the very, very beginning of the film, we see the daughter, the mother, Chris Ann, turning up and saying, "It's outrageous. You've basically told the magazine that some staggering number of people could be the father of this child when you know it's you." And he said, "I don't know it's me. I don't know it's me anyway. I'm just working from an algorithm." There's a very nicely played out sequence in which he attempts to argue something which is completely outrageous by arguing algorithms. Actually, ironically, there is a relationship between him and a woman at the centre of the film, which is the relationship between Steve Jobs and Joanna Hoffman, who, again, Kate Winslet came on the programme, and who has this accent which is inflected by a number of different things, Polish and, European, but also American, which gives her a quality which is very slightly alien to the rest of the drama. Most alien in that she is a three-dimensional, rounded human being who appears to have emotions that function on a level which is recognisable as human interaction. I think that the real genius of Michael Fassbender's performance is that he manages to make the character of Steve Jobs interesting and weirdly magnetic, despite the fact that for the vast majority of the film, he is portrayed as utterly unlikable, much more interested in machines than he is in people. Somebody who is, what the script does is the script sort of gives him a backstory and starts to pick away at things like adoptive parenting and starts to wonder about whether all these, it makes a sympathetic play for him. But it also does not shy away from showing him behaving quite appallingly. I remember it was funny when you first saw the film, and Kate Winslet was coming to the interview, and you said Kate Winslet, who's basically the human part, the human.
She's us. It's finally somebody
you like.
Yes, and says, why can't you just be normal?
Yeah, it's also somebody who reminds everybody how badly things worked out with the HAL 9000 computer in 2001, and they fundamentally shouldn't be trusted. What I like very much about it is, and you'll know the stories already, that the film has not succeeded financially in America. It's been quite a big news story about how much it hasn't managed to find its box office. When it was playing in a limited number of theatres, it was doing very well. Then it opened up wide, and suddenly not so well. And there's been a lot of anguishing and breastbeating about why this would be the case. Is it because the people aren't interested in Steve Jobs? Is it because they find Steve Jobs a character that they don't want to actually go and spend 2 hours with? Is it something to do with the filmmaking itself, because it seems like an alienating structure, although I think the structure is really, really terrific. I mean, it has all those Aaron Sorkin.
It's very claustrophobic, isn't it? Because you don't stray outside once until right at the very end.
Well, no, but on the other hand, you get things like the Opera House, which are, the operatic setting for the revenge. There is a lot of walking and talking through rooms and corridors.
Of course.
There was a moment, I'd say this is very funny, Dave Norris, the projectionist from Universal, said at one point, he was having a conversation with somebody, and he said, that scene when Michael Fassbender and Kate Winslet are talking in a room? And Dave went,
yep, that's
you have to narrow it down. But what's brilliant about it is that there's movement, and that's very, very Sorkin. The walk talk thing is a very, very Sorkin thing, and it's also very, very Danny Boyle. There are movements there. I mean, the cameras have got that sort of that Danny Boyle slick film that goes right back to Shallow Grave with those very, very low tracking shots. I mean, Shallow Grave, you couldn't think of a more claustrophobic film. It basically takes place inside that flat, and yet somehow it manages to have this sense of expanse. So I didn't feel claustrophobic in as much as it wasn't going in, but what I felt claustrophobic was that you're screaming out for human interaction, which is largely presented by Lisa, the child, who grows up during the course of the movie. He's played by 3 different actors during the course of the movie, and who basically is the human heart, along with Joanna Hoffman, who is the sympathetic part of the movie. So I think the thing about it not doing well in America is neither here nor there as in terms of the quality of the film. There are plenty of films that haven't found a huge footing in the box office and yet have been really remarkable. I think that it works on a number of levels. Firstly, I think it's very funny. I think it's very witty, and Sorkin is very much like that. Secondly, I think it's got a good thesis, which is let's do this as around a series of product launches, but let's make the gag the fact that it's all to do with the backstage stuff, and let's actually at one point stand up and say, why is everyone telling me this now? there is an emotional arc in it. I mean, there is a journey. The character doesn't just stagnate. It's not like one of those Wolf of Wall Street things in which you just go, why am I interested? There's no emotion. Incidentally, there has been some sort of discussion about whether or not in any way the film, like any truly interesting film, it's divided audience reactions. Some people who say, I knew Steve Jobs, it was nothing like that. He wasn't that kind of person. Other people who go, you've been soft on him, he was much tougher than that. So that's actually what you want from a screenplay that leaves everybody with their own version of the story. But I thought it was a pretty flawless synthesis of screenwriting, performance across the board, solid performance, and direction by Danny Boyle, taking this thing. He took it on the rebound because he was working on a Bowie project, and I think it's all come together really rather well. And once again, has managed that thing that I can't believe that The Social Network did, which was to make me interested in a story about devices I fundamentally don't care about. And that, for me, tells me that actually the story has more human heart than perhaps it looks like from the outside.